They say your life can change in a second. Mine changed in the middle of a video call, right between zero-day firewall capabilities and encrypted endpoint coverage. The screen froze. My voice cut off mid-sentence, the audio clipping like a broken cassette. My billion-dollar client was left staring at a frozen image of me, mouth open, eyes wide, like some slack-jawed goldfish paused in eternal embarrassment. The moment snapped into silence. No buffering, no reconnecting, just a black screen. My hands hovered over the keyboard, waiting for the signal to return, praying the universe would grant me just 10 more minutes of uptime. But it didn't. He dropped off the call. I lost him. I lost the pitch. I lost the $50,000 contract I had prepped for months. And all because my internet, my lifeline, decided to take a nap at the exact wrong moment. I should have screamed. I should have cried. I should have thrown something. Instead, I stormed into the living room like a man possessed, router in one hand, the other refreshing diagnostics like a twitch. Then I saw it. The download monitor. Spiking. Not small blips. Not background processes. Massive, continuous spikes, like a heart monitor in cardiac arrest. Someone was leeching my bandwidth. Bleeding it. Siphoning it like digital leeches. I opened the network map, scanning for parasites. And there they were. Not one. Not two. A cluster of unfamiliar devices pinging back from one location. The roof. My roof. That was the moment I said it. Quiet, cold, sharp as broken glass. What in the freshly microwaved hell is going on up there? Now I live in a neighborhood that prides itself on peace, order, and painfully sterile friendliness. The kind of place where people wave like politicians and file complaints like prosecutors. Where lawn height is measured with a ruler and kids can't leave chalk drawings on the sidewalk without a committee hearing. An HOA neighborhood. Clean, quiet, and I now realize deeply sinister. I climbed the ladder with the fury of a man about to confront God. My roof greeted me with sunshine and silence until I saw them. 3 large Wi-Fi repeaters. Bolted directly into my shingles. Cables spliced into the power lines. Blinking green. Blinking red. Blinking like they knew they didn't belong but didn't care. Professionally installed. No labels. No warning. No permission. Just there. Sitting like squat little invaders humming along, sucking down bandwidth like gluttonous gremlins. I nearly fell off the ladder. At first, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the city installed them. Maybe it was a shared infrastructure thing, some new smart neighborhood initiative. Maybe I missed an email, a flyer, a community vote. But deep down I knew better. Because in this place, everything is polished, bureaucratic, controlled. And this was guerrilla tech warfare. I descended like a man on fire. I had one goal, answers. I marched straight to the HOA office, phone in hand, photos already queued up, prepared to rain down litigation-grade fury. Inside sat Karen Davenport, our self-appointed queen of order and pastels. Cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders like armor. She greeted me with the smile of a person who believes chaos can be tamed with enough passive-aggressive notes. Mr. Eli, she chirped like I was her lunch appointment. We were meaning to inform you about the new community connectivity program. You've been selected as a hub. Selected. As if I'd won a prize. As if my roof had volunteered to host rogue tech like a 4-star Airbnb for Wi-Fi goblins. I asked her calmly at first, when I had agreed to this. She slid a sheet of paper across the desk. General notice. Dated 3 months ago. Printed in Arial 10 points on the saddest, flimsiest sheet of office paper I'd ever touched. We posted it on the bulletin board, she said with a smile that made me want to set fire to the corkboard in question. That board, I would later discover, lived behind the HOA building. Next to the dumpster. Half covered in spider webs and faded notices about garage sales from 2019. According to Karen, because no one objected, that meant everyone agreed. Implied consent. That was her phrase. You're such a tech guy, she added. You'll be fine. That was the moment I realized 2 things. 1, Karen had no idea who I actually was. And 2, she had just declared war. See, I'm not just a guy who knows how to reset a router. I spent a decade designing classified cybersecurity frameworks for government contractors. I've ghosted hackers mid-attack with scripts I wrote while drinking black coffee in my pajamas. I've seen digital warfare from the inside. So when I looked at Karen, I didn't see a pastel-wrapped neighbor. I saw a threat vector. I walked out of that office without another word. Not because I was done, but because I was just getting started. The first rule of defense isn't to fight back. It's to understand the attack. I needed surveillance. I needed data. I needed to know who was feeding at my digital trough and how much they were consuming. So I went hunting. Every MAC address, every packet, every IP. I mapped them all. I traced usage over days. I pulled graphs, heat maps, and signal strength patterns. The result? Over a dozen households were siphoning signal. Streaming Netflix. Uploading files. One neighbor was mining cryptocurrency on my bandwidth. And as if that weren't insulting enough, the repeaters were leeching electricity. My electricity. They'd spliced into my power grid like cowards in the night. Clean connections. Hidden junction boxes. Not even a courtesy extension cord. My house was a digital utility station, and no one had the decency to tell me. I stood by my window looking out at this picture-perfect suburb, this sun-drenched postcard of American civility. And I laughed. Not the kind of laugh you laugh when something's funny. The kind of laugh that rattles out when your brain finally snaps the last thread of disbelief. They had no idea who they were stealing from. They thought I'd get angry. Maybe file a complaint. Maybe unplug a few wires. But I'm not a man of small gestures. I am a man of architecture, of systems, of beautifully orchestrated revenge. They wanted bandwidth? I would charge them for every byte. They used my roof like public infrastructure? Then I'd treat it like a commercial lease. But not immediately. First, I had to build the trap. And once it was built, I would watch them walk into it, one click at a time. No more yelling. No more begging for fairness. From now on, I would speak in the language this HOA truly understood: contracts, clauses, control, and code. And so it began. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but mine would be served over high-speed connections with packet-level precision. After the rooftop discovery and Karen's pastel-drenched dismissal, I didn't rage or retaliate like an amateur. I architected. Revenge, for me, was not an emotional outburst. It was a systems design problem. First, I needed clarity. So I started where I was strongest: diagnostics. Not just internet traffic. I'm talking about heat signatures, electrical draw, signal tracing, even electromagnetic interference mapping. I patched together a comprehensive visibility grid, using everything from packet sniffers to thermal overlays from my old drone. And that's when the full horror unfolded. These weren't just passive repeaters relaying a modest neighborhood signal. They were high-capacity, enterprise-grade devices, each one capable of distributing signal to dozens of endpoints, and they were. My house had been quietly functioning as the digital heart of a subdivision-wide freeloading operation. Not only that, they were transmitting at a strength high enough to bleed into homes 3 streets over. Someone had essentially built an ISP node on my roof and plugged it into my living room. And then came the electrical evidence. The repeaters weren't on a shared community grid. They were hardwired into my primary breaker box. Not a dedicated circuit, not even a bypass outlet, no. These bastards were directly leeching my kilowatts through a surgically embedded junction buried behind my siding, camouflaged with painted caulk and matched screw heads. It was almost beautiful in its criminality. Almost. But beauty doesn't pay my power bill. I added this to the growing file of data, meticulously time-stamped and annotated. Not because I planned to send it anywhere, yet, but because I knew documentation was a sword, and my case was getting sharper by the hour. Still, evidence alone doesn't win wars. So I moved to the next phase, entrapment. I wasn't going to just cut off the repeaters and scream foul. No, that would be too quick, too merciful. I needed them to keep using it, to keep consuming, so that when I pulled the lever, the impact would be seismic. So I created Skyfiber Enhanced, a fictional internet provider with just enough polish to pass as legitimate, but just enough vagueness to avoid deep scrutiny. Branding? Clean, modern, believable. Policy page? Boilerplate legalese with a few gems tucked deep within. A clause stating that continued usage beyond 50 megabytes per day would be considered premium access, billed at 27 cents per megabyte. Consent? Captured through an auto-trigger splash page that appeared anytime a user connected through one of the rogue repeaters. They'd see what looked like a routine provider update, click agree, and unknowingly sign themselves into my private data trap. The splash page was art. Not just functional, but manipulative by design. I modeled it after real ISPs. A friendly tone, fake customer support links, a logo I designed in 15 minutes using a stock vector and a gradient background. I embedded a script that pinged my server with every interaction, every checkbox ticked, every agreement submitted. Within 24 hours, I had 14 signed consents. 14 households, silently acknowledging my fake terms of service, while continuing to gulp down data like it was free candy. But they wouldn't be laughing when the invoices arrived. I registered a shell company, Datalink Utility Services. A few clicks and a cheap online incorporation service later, I had a legit-sounding email domain, a virtual P.O. box, and a minimalist invoice template. The first batch went out the next day. Nothing outrageous, just $47 here, $89 there. Enough to sting, not enough to spark rebellion. Yet, and for the cherry on top, I sent one to Harold Tompkins, the HOA treasurer, billing him $18,642, citing community tier traffic coordination. The man paid it within 48 hours without so much as an email. Either he didn't read it, didn't understand it, or was so used to signing off on garbage that he didn't blink. Either way, it was gasoline on the fire I was building. And then came the fireworks. Karen received her own invoice, $2,129, due immediately. Her response? A Category 5 meltdown captured entirely by the repeater cam I'd discreetly hidden inside one of the access panels. Watching her wave the paper in the HOA office, accusing Harold of secret vendor deals, demanding answers, it was performance art. But I knew retaliation was coming. HOA types don't surrender. They retaliate through paperwork and pettiness. And sure enough, one morning I found not one, not two, but 3 citations taped to my front door like passive-aggressive valentines. Unauthorized equipment, non-compliant electrical routing, public endangerment through unstable antenna deployment. The irony? The antenna they were referring to wasn't mine. It was theirs, installed without consent, powered by my house, and now labeled as a safety hazard. They wanted to play games. Fine. I dove headfirst into the HOA bylaws, policy books, maintenance clauses, community power use guidelines, every inch of fine print. And what I found wasn't just outdated. It was prehistoric. The rules still referenced VHS systems. There were entire sections about cable boxes, but nothing about digital repeater permissions or power integration clauses. They had built their little kingdom on sand. Then came the twist. A knock at my door one evening. I opened it to find Penelope Baxter, 2 doors down, elderly, always in oversized gardening hats, and perpetually assumed harmless. She handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "They did the same thing to my roof once, years ago. They didn't know I used to work for the FCC." That line stopped time. Penelope wasn't a passive retiree. She was a former federal compliance officer who'd spent decades auditing unauthorized frequency installations and electrical grid manipulations. I invited her in. 10 minutes later, we were at my workstation, analyzing signal logs, repeater firmware, energy usage graphs. Penelope was thrilled, sharp as ever, eyes glinting behind bifocals. She spotted violations I hadn't even considered. Unlicensed hardware, improper shielding, unauthorized electromagnetic leakage that could interfere with nearby medical devices. Her words, not mine. And then she found the jackpot. The repeaters were wired not just into my circuit, but directly into a branch of the power main, bypassing residential usage caps. That meant not only were they stealing, but they were possibly defrauding the city's energy distribution records. Now, it wasn't just an HOA issue. It was criminal. I documented everything. Penelope drafted a formal complaint for the FCC using her old internal templates. But complaints take time, and I wasn't about to just sit around. Instead, I launched Phase 2, the loop script. I injected firmware into the repeaters that triggered a reset every 6 minutes. Just a momentary reboot. Enough to interrupt streaming, glitch smart home devices, crash game sessions. With every reboot, a robotic voice played. Network interruption. Please contact your provider. Confusion erupted like fireworks. Neighborhood chats lit up. Kids screamed about Fortnite. Adults blamed their routers. Karen accused the city. My favorite theory came from someone suggesting a government EMP test. But the best was yet to come. The HOA called a secret emergency meeting. Private. Members only. Late at night in the community center. But they forgot one thing. Their video call software was running through the very repeater still hooked to my network. I patched in silently, turned on my screen recorder, and watched the chaos unfold. Karen ranted about cyber attacks. Harold panicked about financial exposure. One board member suggested taking the whole system offline before lawsuits started flying. They had no idea their entire meltdown was being broadcast in real time to a private Facebook group I'd created under a pseudonym, HOA Horrors. Membership exploded. Residents started sharing their own horror stories. Citation for wind chimes. Fines for whimsical bird baths. Secret budget approvals. And in the center of it all, Karen, cracking under the weight of her own control freak empire. But I wasn't done. Because chaos is only the prelude. Real revolution requires precision. And my next move would be nothing short of surgical. They say a system doesn't collapse all at once, it fractures. First, hairline cracks that go unnoticed, then whispers through the wires, then one loud snap heard by everyone. By the time I entered Chapter 3 of my suburban saga, the snap had echoed across every HOA-approved street sign and garden gnome on the block. I didn't just want to dismantle the system. I wanted to expose its soft underbelly, show the neighbors that their pristine, clipboard-wielding regime was a farce built on unearned authority and unchecked arrogance. Karen and her board thought they were running a neighborhood. What they were actually running was a bureaucracy so brittle, all it took was a few lines of code and one lemon-carrying former FCC agent to splinter it in half. The loop script I'd deployed was doing its job. Every 6 minutes, the repeaters coughed, crashed, and whispered their eerie robotic message. Network interruption. Please contact your provider. But I wasn't satisfied with confusion. I wanted consequence. The splash page was still up and running, still logging agreements, still tracking usage. But now, I added a new clause, one line buried beneath layers of text, crafted with just enough plausible deniability to make any legal argument a nightmare for whoever tried to challenge it. The clause gave me consent to remotely monitor and intervene with connected traffic for system integrity purposes. That line opened the door to my next move, bandwidth throttling and behavioral tagging. Using a system I'd borrowed from an old consulting job, I built a smart filter that analyzed user habits, who was binging streaming services at 2 a.m., who played MMOs for 8 hours straight, who uploaded gigabytes worth of security cam footage that was suspiciously high resolution for backyard surveillance. Each of them got their own digital profile. And with that, I began assigning pricing tiers. Not publicly, not loudly, just enough of a tweak to cause stress. One day, a neighbor's Hulu buffered every 10 minutes. The next, someone else's online classes kept disconnecting. A family's smart thermostat started lagging. Not because I was sabotaging anything, but because they were exceeding the soft usage caps outlined in the now binding terms of service. I throttled only when the data justified it. It was petty, surgical, delicious. Meanwhile, the HOA doubled down on their old tactics, hoping to reassert dominance through paper cuts. 3 more citations arrived, one accusing me of unauthorized surveillance deployment, which was hilarious given their own repeater cams, and another citing a conspicuous lack of landscaping harmony because my front yard lacked seasonal flowers. The final one, though, was pure poetry, engaging in activities deemed disruptive to the shared community aesthetic. That one I framed. But it wasn't just me they were targeting now. I'd destabilized their image. Neighbors began asking questions. At first, it was quiet, an email here, a hushed conversation at the mailbox there. But then one of them, Mr. Daniel Lin, an architect with an eye for legal inconsistencies, knocked on my door holding 3 years' worth of HOA budgets. They've been approving private projects with community funds, he said, eyes gleaming. No disclosure, no vote. That was the kind of data I couldn't code, human outrage. Real, simmering resentment. We built a team, Penelope, the compliance whisperer, Daniel, the budget sleuth, and myself, the network ghost. We called ourselves the Quiet Uprising. Our first act wasn't digital, it was paper. A formal request for financial transparency under an obscure clause buried on page 83 of the HOA charter, requiring open records upon member demand. Karen delayed. She deflected. But Daniel anticipated that. He'd already mailed certified copies to every resident, along with a plain language breakdown of questionable expenses, including a $4,700 charge for decorative paving enhancements that turned out to be a custom stone path installed exclusively in Karen's backyard. Residents began murmuring. The bulletin board, the one behind the dumpster, was suddenly cleaned. Flyers appeared, some anonymously authored, others signed by fed-up homeowners. Where did our fees go? Why is our Wi-Fi unusable? Who approved repeaters on private property? And perhaps my favorite, why is Karen so afraid of sunlight and questions? But I wasn't finished. Not even close. One evening, during a particularly brutal bandwidth spike, I initiated what I called the bounce trap. It was a simple yet infuriating script wired into my smart home load balancer. Anytime power usage from the repeater junction surged past a defined threshold, the system would initiate a 12-second blackout to the repeater circuit only. It didn't affect my house, just theirs. Smart TVs blinked off. Tablets reset. Game consoles roared in frustration. But the real chaos came from the effect I embedded at the tail end of each outage. A Wi-Fi SSID rename. Each time the network crashed and came back, it reappeared with a new name, each more antagonistic than the last. Karen is not your queen. Ask why you paid Weiss. HOA monsters. And then, finally, bandwidth justice. Screenshots started surfacing in group chats, captioned with disbelief and admiration. I didn't claim them. I didn't have to. The idea had taken root. That week, Karen called for a community security lockdown meeting, demanding the repeater system be shut down until a new provider could be found. She still believed this was a provider issue. She had no idea the provider lived 2 houses down and drank coffee while watching her meltdown through the very signal she was trying to fix. I streamed the meeting again, this time to a larger group of residents now in an encrypted channel. By the end of the session, 2 board members resigned. One cited a hostile tech climate. Another simply said, I didn't sign up for this war. That left Karen alone, grasping for control, trying to patch a dam that had already burst. The next day, Harold, yes, Harold the treasurer, showed up at my door holding a manila folder and looking like a man who'd seen the edge of the abyss. I didn't know, he said, voice quiet. I just signed what she gave me. Inside the folder were handwritten notes, his own log of questionable approvals, invoices paid without supporting documentation, funds transferred into discretionary subaccounts. He wasn't a villain. He was a pawn who'd just realized he was part of someone else's endgame. With his help, we compiled everything: financial records, bandwidth logs, screenshots of consent agreements, images of illegal wiring, FCC documentation, and statements from affected neighbors. We didn't make a big show. We just quietly sent it all, compiled, watermarked, cross-referenced, to the city's municipal ethics board and the district attorney's office. We didn't have to scream. We just let the paperwork whisper. But just as the silence began to take over, Karen struck again. One last attempt to reassert power. A cease and desist letter, hand-delivered and wrapped in the kind of faux legal bravado that screamed desperation. She accused me of cyber intrusion, infrastructural destabilization, and emotional terrorism. That last one almost made me laugh. Almost. But instead of responding with more chaos, I handed the letter to Penelope. She edited it like a federal audit. Then I sent it to my lawyer. 2 days later, Karen received a 26-page response citing violations of property law, digital fraud statutes, power theft, and misappropriation of funds. Attached were affidavits, photos, technical diagrams, and most damning of all, a notarized summary of her own voice during the leaked meeting, trying to cover up her role in the installation scheme. The silence that followed was monumental. No more citations. No more threats. No more pastel pontifications. Karen stopped showing up to board meetings. Emails went unanswered. The HOA's official site redirected to an error page. A week later, Penelope received a letter. Karen had stepped down from the HOA board citing personal health stressors. And just like that, the signal began to clear, not just the Wi-Fi but the noise, the lies, the control. The neighborhood didn't just reboot. It began to wake up. We weren't done. Not yet. But for the first time, people had started looking up at the repeaters and asking, who put those there? And more importantly, why did we let them? They say once power slips, it doesn't fall. It slides, quietly at first, then all at once. Karen's resignation wasn't the end. It was the moment the spell broke. For years, people in this neighborhood had looked at the HOA as if it were some sacred, untouchable entity, like the weather or traffic. You didn't fight it. You endured it. You paid your dues, trimmed your hedges to regulation height, and prayed your mailbox paint wasn't too reflective. But the moment Karen stepped down citing personal health stressors, the illusion cracked. And when the illusion dies, everything becomes negotiable. The HOA meetings, once closed-door performances masked as governance, were now public. Attendance skyrocketed. People who had never spoken more than a polite driveway, hi, now sat next to each other with printed notes, ready to ask questions that used to stay buried in whispers. I didn't show up. I didn't have to. The system was speaking for itself now. I watched it unfold from my office, multiple streams open, a drink in hand, and a new subroutine-eyed program blinking quietly in the corner. Project Reclamation. While the board scrambled to rewrite its own rules, my own initiative took flight. Datalink Utility Services, my shell company turned quasi-SP, was now officially licensed as a local vendor thanks to a quick turn of paperwork, a small licensing fee, and Penelope's old contacts in municipal tech regulation. I wasn't just playing the game anymore. I'd changed the game board. I offered the residents what they always wanted but never dared to ask for: fast, reliable, transparent internet, no backdoor HOA politics, no vague infrastructure plans, just a direct service with itemized bills and zero passive-aggressive footnotes. I called it voluntary participation, but in reality, it became a quiet migration. Within 4 days, 27 homes signed up. By day 10, that number doubled. And then came the optics war. The HOA, now reduced to a skeleton crew of legacy loyalists and confused replacements, issued a statement accusing external vendors of undermining community cohesion. They claimed my tower, yes, I had a tower now, violated line-of-sight architectural integrity, a clause so vague it could be used against a tree. But they hadn't read the new zoning adjustments filed 3 weeks prior, which now listed the structure as a dual-purpose weather and signal monitoring station. Legally sound, engineering stamped, and registered with the city. The moment the tower's first beam cast its shadow across Karen's former prize-winning flower beds, I received an anonymous gift, a pie with bandwidth king, etched in cinnamon across the crust. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't need to. The house had spoken. But the opposition didn't disappear, they metastasized. A handful of disgruntled residents started forming what they called the Preservation Committee, a side group dedicated to restoring neighborhood values. They spoke in dog whistles and printed flyers that danced around words like traditional order and digital decency. They weren't fighting the internet, they were fighting the idea that someone like me, someone who had quietly torn apart their old power structure with nothing but routers and revenge, could now be trusted with something as sacred as infrastructure. So I gave them something to chew on. A monthly report. Public. Visual. Interactive. I posted latency maps, uptime records, outage timelines, and cost comparisons between my service and what the HOA had been piloting. It wasn't even close. My network was faster, cheaper, and had zero incidents of hidden surcharges or mysteriously lost invoices. Penelope, now interim president, suggested opening the books entirely. Her motion passed unanimously. For the first time, residents saw where their dues had gone. Landscaping over-budgeted by 230%. Maintenance contracts awarded to companies with matching surnames to former board members. One receipt included a $300 charge for strategic community refreshment logistics. Turns out it was wine for Karen's private book club. The revolt became reform. People didn't just cancel their old connections. They canceled their silence. The neighborhood newsletter, once a bland collage of fence etiquette and pet waste reminders, now included community vote links, transparency reports, and suggestions for infrastructure improvements sourced from actual residents. But revolutions attract enemies. One evening, I received a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a cease and desist notice, not from Karen, but from a law firm representing a so-called residential digital services coalition. The accusation? Operating a localized communication monopoly without sufficient oversight. The phrasing was hilarious. I wasn't a monopoly. I was the only one offering what people wanted because the HOA had buried every other alternative beneath bureaucracy and apathy. Still, I responded formally, attaching all legal documents, including signed consent forms, vendor approvals, and a detailed explanation of service opt-in policies. My tone was polite. My documentation brutal. The complaint evaporated in silence 2 weeks later. Then came the final act of defiance. The repeaters, the original invaders on my roof, still sat there humming, though now they did nothing but broadcast jokes. I'd reprogrammed them one last time to emit a public Wi-Fi signal titled "Karen stole bandwidth." Anyone who connected was redirected to a landing page that read, "Ask your HOA why your connection sucks." It wasn't malicious. It was performance art. Someone turned it into a meme. Someone else printed it on a mug. I never claimed credit, but the mug mysteriously appeared on my porch, filled with gift cards and thank you notes. That weekend, I finally did it. I climbed back onto the roof, this time with purpose, gloves, a wrench, and a Bluetooth speaker. I recorded the moment. Me unscrewing the bolts, ripping the last cable out, the speaker playing the national anthem in slow acoustic. When the final box hit the inside of the trash bin with a metallic thud, I raised a toast to the sky and posted the video. It went semi-viral in local tech circles. Someone called it poetic infrastructure liberation. I called it closure. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came quietly, like all real victories do. A knock at the door. A middle-aged man and his daughter stood on my porch, holding a cake shaped like a Wi-Fi router. They had just bought Karen's old house. The man used to teach cybersecurity at a university. His daughter ran a Discord server for indie game developers. They said they heard rumors about the guy who fixed the whole neighborhood with nothing but spite, a laptop, and a tower. I welcomed them in. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the lights flicker across homes finally connected to something honest, I realized something simple. Power isn't about position. It's about control over your own space, your own voice, your own signal. They had tried to take that from me, one unauthorized cable at a time. And I'd taken it back, one keystroke, one redirect, one beautifully crafted packet at a time. The HOA wasn't dead, but it was different, better, transparent, accountable. And for the first time in years, the signal in this neighborhood wasn't just stable. It was free. They say every story ends eventually, but I never believed that. Not really. Stories don't end, they evolve, quiet down, shift into the background until someone presses play again. I thought mine had wrapped neatly with the repeater takedown, the neighborhood rebirth, and the Wi-Fi cake delivered by the new owners of Karen's former queendom. But peace has a funny way of ringing hollow when you've spent months waging digital war. After everything, I still kept checking logs, still ran passive diagnostics, still monitored the pulse of the network like a surgeon who can't stop feeling for irregular heartbeats. And then, as if summoned by my refusal to let go, it came, a registered envelope, crisp and heavy, stamped with the cold serif font of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside, a complaint. Filed not by the HOA, not by any resident, but by Karen Davenport herself. The return address had changed. She'd moved to a different part of town, same city, but far enough away to feel like exile. And yet, 3 weeks after her defeat, she'd mustered enough stubborn venom to accuse me of malicious interference with community operations, public humiliation, data fraud, and in her words, this part almost made me spit out my coffee: cyber piracy. According to Karen, I had digitally boarded her organizational ship and flown a Jolly Roger flag while looting her authority byte by byte. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so tedious. She claimed emotional distress. She claimed career damage. She claimed I had caused irreparable harm to her public standing. She claimed a lot of things. But I wasn't angry. Not this time. I'd graduated from outrage. Instead, I opened my archive. See, while Karen was busy flailing, I had been documenting every unauthorized repeater bolt, every kilowatt drained, every community complaint, every recorded HOA meeting, every citation issued, and every fake invoice she either approved or ignored. I didn't even need to exaggerate. The truth was already dramatic enough. I called my lawyer. We met for coffee. 36 hours later, a 26-page response was drafted, clinical, bulletproof, and entirely devoid of emotional flourishes. My counterclaim included energy theft, illegal hardware installation, civil rights violations, property code infractions, and retaliation through falsified HOA citations. Attached, signed statements from neighbors, annotated technical diagrams, surveillance stills, and a notarized analysis written by Penelope herself detailing violations of FCC compliance and electrical safety codes. We didn't just respond. We delivered a playbook for her legal humiliation. 2 weeks later, her lawyer folded. Quietly, without fanfare, a letter arrived stating Karen would withdraw her complaint due to health-related stress. Translation: she lost and she knew it. And just like that, the final echo of her rule dissolved. The news traveled faster than any repeater signal ever had. People talked, softly at first, then louder. Karen's name became a cautionary tale whispered on community walks and in HOA subcommittee chats. Her lawn grew wild. Her flower beds withered. And one morning, just after sunrise, a moving truck pulled into her driveway and carried away her pastel empire one wicker chair at a time. She didn't wave goodbye. No one did. The house sold within days. The new owners, a retired IT professor and his daughter, who, as it turned out, ran a successful online gaming guild, settled in with quiet excitement. They set up their own subnet the first weekend, asked intelligent questions about tower placement, and brought over a cake shaped like a fiber switch. Integration complete. But what followed wasn't just recovery. It was reinvention. With Penelope officially elected as HOA president and Daniel Lynn stepping in as treasurer, the entire governance structure was rewritten. Transparency became not just a goal but a requirement. Votes went public. Meetings were streamed. Budgets were posted monthly in plain language. Citations had to be photographed, time-stamped, and justified by 2 separate board signatures. But the best change was structural. A new bylaw was proposed and unanimously passed. No technological installation could proceed without individual written consent from any affected homeowner. No more bulletin board notices behind dumpsters. No more implied consent by silence. Power, once hoarded and abused, was now distributed, visible, accountable. The repeater network was dismantled entirely. Residents who had once quietly enjoyed the signal, without asking, now installed their own connections through official channels. I helped. Not for free, but fairly. By the end of the next quarter, I had over 30 paying clients on my private subnet. My little consulting service had become the neighborhood's digital backbone. Stable, secure, human. The ham tower stood tall, repurposed as a weather tracker and a perch for migratory birds. Occasionally, it picked up stray signals from the nearby emergency broadcast network, which I quietly filtered and stored in a secured vault. Old habits die hard. And the name Datalink Utility Services? It stuck. What started as a joke became a legitimate small business, one with an accidental client base, city approval, and more goodwill than any HOA committee could ever fake. Penelope even offered me a stipend, calling me the neighborhood's digital watchdog. I declined the money, but I appreciated the title. Weeks passed. Seasons changed. The yard grew softer, less manicured, more natural. People waved more. Children played in front lawns again, without fear of a surprise HOA infraction. Someone painted their shutters blue. No one reported it. Even the passive-aggressive couple 2 houses down, the ones who once complained about my trash bins being visible from the street, left a cup of coffee on my porch one morning with a note that simply said, "Thanks." That's when I knew the war was truly over. But then, as if the universe couldn't resist one last twist, another package arrived. No return address. No signature. Just my name, printed cleanly across the label in all caps. I opened it slowly, half expecting a final legal threat or an old HOA document buried for revenge. Inside was a trophy, a miniature router, mounted on a wooden base, polished to a gleam. On the plaque, engraved with an elegant serif font, were the words, "King of Bandwidth Neighborhood Edition." There was no note, no explanation, just that perfect little monument shining under the kitchen light like a relic from some absurd, beautiful tech crusade. I placed it next to the framed picture of my dog wearing sunglasses and my original firewall prototype from a decade ago. It fit perfectly, because the truth is, this wasn't just a story about Wi-Fi. It wasn't about routers or bandwidth or even power lines. It was about boundaries, about what happens when someone crosses them and assumes you'll just nod and accept it. It was about resistance, the quiet, calculated kind, the kind that doesn't yell or throw bricks. The kind that builds systems. That collects receipts. That codes, documents, waits, and then acts with terrifying precision. I never asked to be the villain in Karen's story. I never wanted to be the hero in mine. But when they climbed onto my roof without asking, when they drilled into my shingles and my power grid, when they looked me in the face and said, "You'll be fine," they flipped a switch they couldn't unflip. They made the mistake of assuming I was just a neighbor with a laptop, but I was a weapon waiting to be aimed. So if you ever find yourself in a neighborhood where someone thinks their title gives them the right to take what isn't theirs, your network, your power, your silence, remember my story. And remember that sometimes the strongest signal isn't broadcasted. It's built quietly, line by line, under the surface, until the moment comes to turn the power back on. And when that moment comes, make sure your router's engraved.